Welcome, everybody, to Breaching the Boardroom podcast. I am your host, David Morrow, and in the studio today is David Vigorust, Chief Scientific Officer for Spectrum Solutions. Dave, welcome to the studio, sir.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, so share with the listeners what your current role is and what all Spectrum Solutions, what the mission is.
So the current role is twofold. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer, so I'm in charge of developing out all of our scientific endeavors. So that's laboratory development, everything on the R&D side. We do a number of different types of collection devices, medical devices for direct-to-consumer, physician-directed. So, things like, the 23andMe and Ancestry, those kinds of collection devices that you see on the market. We do a number of those for a broad range of companies that are in functional medicine, dentistry, traditional medicine, screening programs. And so I do that on one side, and then I'm also in charge of all the strategic partnerships and initiatives that we're trying to propose with large DSOs. Those are dental service organizations, large healthcare companies, self-employed groups, any place where diagnostic testing and screening can be of benefit to patients and to employees.
It's such a critical role in medicine. So that is excellent. When did Spectrum get founded? Is it recent? I mean, you guys have had a lot of success.
Yeah, Spectrum has been around for nearly 20 years.
Yeah, that's a great run.
It was originally started as a medical device developer. We do all of the manufacturing of our devices here in the U.S.
Great.
So the company had developed out a number of proprietary solutions for preservation. We do all of the plastic extrusion. We do all the kitting and packaging. So everything is done onshore here in the U.S. It's been like that for years and years. But we've done a variety of different kinds of services. We've done fulfillment for pharmaceutical companies, for cosmetic companies. In 19 and 20, at the beginning of COVID, the company pivoted and we basically spent most of our focus on developing collection devices to address COVID. And we were one of the first companies to receive an emergency use authorization using saliva as a collection media, as opposed to those nasopharyngeal swabs that were in short supply, and most people were very uncomfortable getting their sample, especially as a self-collected, going back to the back of the nasopharyngeal cavity and trying to take that sample. So we developed out a way of doing that via saliva and perfected a preservation solution that allows us to capture that sample and then be able to transport it to the laboratory, whether it's our laboratory or others, for the proper identification and analysis.
So that's phenomenal. And now, do you white label it for brands? Like if you guys are doing 23andMe or Ancestry, will they send you like their packaging and then you guys ship it out as them, or do you just send it to them and then they ship it out?
It's a mixture of the two. We've done a variety of different types of packaging like that. They send us their logos, they send us their information, and we basically design the kit for them that uses our collection device inside of it, but it would have their instructions and their signage. And it basically is a white label for them. We do that for a number of companies. And then we do have some companies that just take our collection device and use it as is. And that can go to any number of laboratories. It can go to all the big ones, that we have out there. It can go to small diagnostic reference labs that have specialty services like cancer and diabetes and heart disease. Mm-hmm. So it's a mix. Just depends on what our client is interested in. We have a number of them that want to use our device, but they want it to reflect their brand and their signage.
And when you guys are doing it for companies like Ancestry or 23andMe, are the results, is the testing done with you guys, or are you guys capturing, and obviously you guys are capturing in a compliant way the actual specimens, and then do you send it to them and then they run those tests and tell everybody their heritage?
For those companies, they have their own laboratories that they've either built themselves or engaged with. Mm-hmm. We do have our own, so we have our own diagnostic development company and a CLIA and CAP certified laboratories. So we have our own assays that we've developed internally that rely upon our sample collection devices. So we've built in the last year or so, we are building a test to treat model. So basically we provide the kit, we provide the diagnostic development, we provide the laboratory, and then ultimately we would provide the therapeutic, whether that's via compound pharmacy or it could be, off the shelf, not off the shelf, but, commercial branded pharmaceutical products or nutraceuticals. So it's a variety of different approaches, but we have our own internal as well as providing to other laboratories that do their own kinds of services.
That's excellent. And in terms of leadership, like how do you lead teams when you're doing things that have such a big impact? And obviously they have to be done correctly and in a compliant way. Like how do you lead teams to make sure you are hiring the right teams and you're training them in your methodologies? Any insight on that you can provide?
Well, my personal approach has always been that you identify the right kinds of people for the job and you just try to give them the support that they need to do their job. I'm not in general one of those people who likes to micromanage them and try to tell them every little bit about how they do their job. Because if you hire the right people, they know their job, they know how to do it, and they just need to be provided the resources in order to reach whatever that goal is. So I tend to be more hands-off than micromanaging people. And, when you have a very skilled group of employees like we have chemical engineers, we have regulatory people, we have a variety of different PhDs, from bioengineering PhDs to molecular biology PhDs. They've all gone through a significant amount of training in their career. And as long as you have the right fit and the right culture, those people will excel if you just give them the right kinds of resources. You don't have to be nitpicking on every little thing that they do.
Certainly. Right. Yeah.
So,
And you just need to integrate them, I would imagine, into your methodologies, right? Like here's,
right.
This quarter we have to report on this to this client or whatever it might be. And so could you provide us those reports or those findings or your analysis by this date? And you just kind of,
Right.
do you just set up a regular cadence with them, check in periodically?
Yeah, we have a number of cross-functional teams. So we spend a fair bit of time each week going through the different projects that we have, what's necessary for those projects to be accomplished. Now that could come from somebody in R&D who's working on a chemical process or an extrusion process or a mixing process. And then we have to engage the regulatory people to make sure we're in compliance with all the GMP and all the other requirements that go into good manufacturing. And then we have FDA advisors and experts and molecular. So we spend a fair bit of time every week huddled together with these different cross-functional teams to make sure that if we have a kit that needs to be produced, we have the right people. If we have an assay that's being developed, we have the right people. So, and that mixes and matches as people are needed and as their expertise is required to finish up that particular part of the job. And we have usually maybe a dozen different jobs going for different kinds of customers.
Sure.
It could be a
So
nutraceutical. It could be
the same team might meet on a couple different
different things, right?
Or there might be other players that come in based on the given project or the given engagement.
Right. So we have two 510K submissions to the FDA in progress for our device. I mean, obviously these devices have to have some level of regulatory clearance to make sure that they're safe and effective and they do what we intend for them to do. So that's a long and detailed process from a number of different stakeholders that have to pipe in on what's our manufacturing process look like. Does it comply with all of the 13485? Does it comply with FDA? Does it comply with USDA if we're doing anything that's in the veterinary side? So there's always people that are being pulled into different meetings as their expertise is required.
Do you guys have to be certified in any way through CMMC? I know that you might be doing things directly for Department of Defense or for the federal government. So maybe not CMMC.
We've done a little bit of work with the NIH. We've done some work with the DoD, like for BARDA purposes or for. Right. We're actively trying to engage with the DoD in each of the four branches of the military, because there's some avenue for our testing platforms to be used for force readiness in the military, right? To make sure that our soldiers are ready to go overseas, that they're as healthy as possible, that they don't have any underlying concerns, dental concerns, cardiovascular concerns, neurological concerns. And then we're also trying to engage with the Department of Veteran Affairs. So we're going through those processes of being on the federal supply schedule and being part of SAM, which again, I'm sure you're probably aware is a very long process of
Oh yeah, there's a lot of controls that have to be placed and assessments and exams and audits.
Right, right. So there's always some aspect of that going on where we have auditors that are checking on us. We have regulatory people that are asking questions back and forth between the FDA or whichever organization we're currently trying to do business with.
Yeah. Hey, for listeners that might not be in the medical field or the diagnostic field, can you explain what is an assay? Like, I think we all can picture in our minds what a kit is. And anybody that's done 23andMe or Ancestry might have done that, right? We understand what the kit is for the self-testing. But, well, what's an assay?
So it could be something as simple as one biological marker. So let's just say your cholesterol test, for example. That's a lipid assay, right? So what we would do is we would develop a laboratory test
of what normal is or what this is, and then
we would develop a laboratory test, and based on what would the normal values be for the population, we would develop that test out so that we could use it either for a screening purpose or a diagnostic purpose. That's kind of the simple one. I think everybody has had their cholesterol drawn. Yeah, but you can get into more advanced types of cholesterols, right? Not just your LDL, but we could do particle size lipids. We could do ApoE and ApoB, and it can get very complicated.
Right.
So the assay could be something as simple as one biomarker or as complex as 10 or 20 biomarkers. And a lot of times, like if you're in the functional medicine space, they want as much detail about your lipid profile as possible to get an accurate cardiovascular risk or brain risk. So the more data that you can put together in that particular test, the more insight the physician or the clinician has on, well, how do I go about best treating you? Do I need to put you on a statin drug? Do I need to do this? Do you need exercise? Do you need, right? So cholesterol is one very rough measurement. And in order to really get a good picture for what your cardiovascular risk is, you would have to have a multitude of different tests within that assay.
Makes perfect sense. Yeah. So how are we, I just want to ask you generally, how are we as an industry getting to the point of having like blood drawn and being able to run hundreds of tests from it, or being able to not have to drive vials and vials of blood to be able to assess that? I'm always thinking, I'm thinking, obviously the popular case was Theranos, where they made claims their technology wasn't there were issues, etc. Not making a comment on that. I'm more curious is how close are we to actually achieving that? Like,
there are ways to do it.
Yeah,
there are ways to do it. So just as an example, part of our company is a molecular diagnostic developer, and we use a platform called a microarray. So it's basically a glass slide, and on that glass slide you have the deposition of targets, right? And that could be the cholesterol, as going back to that as an example. There could be 10 different cholesterol related targets that we want to investigate. We could print those on a glass slide and then take a small amount of sample. And that could be blood, it could be urine, it could be saliva, it could be any number of those things. And that gets applied to the slide. And then there's a reaction that occurs. And typically it's a colorimetric or a fluorescent reaction. It turns yellow or it turns blue. The depth of that color indicates how strong the reaction is in the well. Or it could be a fluorescent, which is it's a light derived marker. So it's either blue light or red light, and you activate it with a laser. And that lights up, and then we use a computer to measure how strong is that light.
Right, like on a scale,
right. And then we would have built in what's the normal reference range. And this amount of light corresponds to this concentration of that target. And then on this other side over here, a very high emission of light corresponds to this. And on that scale, we would determine where you sit on the normal range.
That's
But
amazing.
using these microarrays, I mean, you could have hundreds of targets printed on this glass slide.
Right.
So,
So you could do all of those tests essentially from
right, from a
a single
technical
drop of
standpoint,
something. Right.
right, from a technical standpoint, we're not far from being able to do that. The technology exists to do kind of what Theranos was intending to do. The unfortunate thing is that she kind of made it seem as though she was developing this brand new technology
Yeah.
that was going to be able to do this. And
Right.
when you looked at that device, you found that what she basically had was a miniaturization of the devices we already have.
Right.
Right. So a miniaturized microscope and a miniaturized
Mm-hmm.
flow cytometer. And I mean, she was taking technology that had already existed and miniaturized it into the box. And the idea is something I think a lot of people are very interested in, being able to non-invasively monitor a patient
Oh yeah.
or to do so with a limited amount of blood. I mean, right now,
Right.
if I wanted to do an extensive functional medicine profile, there'd be 10 or 12 vials of blood that would be drawn from me.
Yeah, and people don't like that. Right?
No,
Like
but
nobody wants that needle in their arm drawing pints of like all the blood for so long, right? All the
right. And the
vials.
reality is that we don't need that much blood.
Right.
These assays oftentimes are done on a very small volume of
Yeah.
blood.
Right.
So we can miniaturize that collection down. And there are devices on the market now, collection for blood and for serum, and we specialize more so in saliva collection.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some
Right.
of these down there that are a tenth of the size of that blood tube that you're typically
Yeah.
getting drawn with. But it still requires a finger stick. And a lot of
Right.
people are probably more adverse to the finger stick than they are to the venous draw.
Yeah.
So one of the things we've tried to really flesh out and develop, and we're actively in a lot of R&D work, is what kinds of things can we detect from saliva? And
That's
if
what I was curious. That's what I wanted to ask you. Like, how close are you from doing some of those tests through saliva? Because,
very
like,
close, very
when you and I
close.
were speaking before, there's so many signs in the oral aspect of a person's physiology that are
Mhm.
indicative of what's going on in the rest of their body.
So for the most part, anything that can be detected in the blood can be detected in the saliva.
See, that's powerful. That'll change things.
It will. The fluid component of blood is the same fluid component that you have in saliva.
Interesting.
So that liquid component of the blood passes into the salivary gland and it gets into the saliva.
Mm-hmm.
So just as an example, you would typically go into your doctor and you'd get blood drawn to look at your liver enzymes.
Right.
Well, those same liver enzymes are readily detected in your saliva. So I could non-invasively and remotely check you for your liver function with just a saliva sample.
Well, think about that and think about the benefit to the public, right? Because it's less invasive, it's less painful, right? People will do it more often and it can be done remotely because the saliva collection that has been kind of mastered. Like you guys have mastered it, right? Like being able to
Right.
collect it in a compliant way that preserves it and then just ships it, then you can get all the test results. That to me seems like a wonderful future for medicine.
We have assays that are up and going and currently running that will look at your hormone levels using
See,
saliva.
that's great. Yeah.
So we can monitor your testosterone, your estradiol, your progesterone. We can look at stress hormones like cortisol, things
Mm.
like DHEA. We can do your liver enzymes if we so desired. There are some things that don't match up well. Like obviously we can't do your cholesterol test with a saliva sample. That just doesn't work that well. It's a different type of analyte. And we can't do
Interesting.
like your blood
Right.
count. Like
Okay.
looking at your CBC, what's your white count, what's your red cell count. Those don't work. Those kinds of assays don't work with saliva. But it opens the door for saliva to be a very nice adjunct to blood.
Oh yeah.
There's going to be times when blood is the only sample that will achieve the result you're looking for. But if you're following somebody with diabetes, for example, or somebody with heart disease or somebody with Alzheimer's, there are ways in which to remote monitor them using saliva, and in worst case, using a finger stick of blood on a dry blood spot card. That you do your finger stick at home, 2 drops of blood on the paper card, send that back in, and we can use that to monitor your inflammation profile, your liver enzymes, your kidneys. So there's a whole host of things we could do using a small amount of blood, or alternatively, a saliva collection.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And because we have perfected the preservation solution for both
Right.
DNA and RNA, we also have one that we call the multi-omic that allows us to look at proteins. It preserves the proteins in their normal. And that means that when it gets to the laboratory, it's a viable sample. It doesn't require refrigeration or ice. It's not a hard sample to collect. I mean, really, it's as simple as spitting into a tube and putting the cap on it.
Right.
There's no invasive procedure to it. There's no training that's required.
When you can do it from home, so I mean, it just gets people more preventative medicine and preventative care up front.
Right. Right.
Yeah, that's really good.
And
Hey,
that's
I
where we're
wanted to
trying to get
ask,
to.
yeah, I want to pivot just a little bit, but I want to ask you about how technology and artificial intelligence are being integrated into what you all are doing. Can you share a little bit about that? I'm sure like their technology is obviously key. It's the baseline that all of the data and all of the testing sits on. But
Mhm.
walk us through how you guys are leveraging advances in it and how artificial intelligence plays a part in any of this, if at all yet.
Oh, it does. It does. We've
I
always had
figured it did.
a very strong scientific and engineering structure to the companies, right? So Spectrum Solutions started off, in this one way of designing the collection kits. In the last 18 months, we acquired this very advanced microarray production facility that everything in that facility has been designed in-house from scratch.
Mm,
So all of the engineering was done in-house. This isn't an instrument that we went out and bought from somebody else.
right.
These are instruments that we built ourselves.
Wow.
So there's a lot of technology that's built into that. And then once we have the results on the other end, now we have a variety of analysis tools that would help us better understand not just what your cholesterol impact is, but what's the impact on the other dozen lights that we're interested in looking at, the other targets. And the way that AI is coming in a lot of these different scenarios is that if we can properly train the software, the algorithm to recognize patterns that we can't see, right? And that may be like in an image, for example. The AI can now look at an X-ray image and can see shades of gray that the human eye can't see, which means that it can identify a spot that might indicate a very small microtumor.
What a great way of seeing it. And that way you can remove it and have it
Remove it and monitor it. And
addressed right away
right,
before it causes damage and spread.
right. So
Yeah, and
that's
some of
one
those
example.
things, yeah, and some of those things aren't even detectable by the human eyes. You see.
No. We have a limitation on the number of shades of gray that we can distinguish.
Hmm.
So when you look at the scale of gray, there's 256 shades of gray. And the
Really?
human eye can't distinguish each of those 256 shades, right? From white to black,
Right.
there's 256 gradations in there. But if you see just a tiny difference in gray that the eye cannot pick up,
Right.
the AI algorithm can see that and can do measurements.
Oh.
And so we see that in dentistry, we see that in radiology, that these AI algorithms can come in and identify signatures and patterns that are not apparent to the human and not apparent to some of the analysis software that we had before. So for us, when we look at these analytes and we look at how someone with a particular disease has a constellation of these analytes at different levels, the human sees those as not in the whole picture, right? It sees them individually and says, okay, well, this one's a little elevated, this one's a little bit down.
Yeah.
But the AI, if it's properly trained, can recognize that elevation and this decrease is an indication oftentimes of this particular problem. And the human doesn't make that connection as quickly as the AI can.
Wow.
But it's all dependent on how good we can train the AI, right?
Right. And how are you guys doing that? Like, and are you, when you were integrating AI into this, did you have to have policies of what your employees could use the AI for, or
Yeah,
like were there some guardrails? Because it's such a popular discussion in the cybersecurity community about, we all want to use it, but we have to put some guardrails, but we don't want the guardrails to be restrictive and stop creativity. We just want to be safe. So,
right. So there's always those discussions. Where are those
yeah,
guardrails? What are different people allowed to do with that information, right? Obviously,
right.
patients are very concerned about, well, what are you going to do?
Yeah, are you
And
going
we
to put
saw
my
this,
PHI in a big
right,
machine learning and then somebody else can access it? That's not
right.
happening.
And
Right.
then that algorithm, produces let's say it produces a report that says you have a 47% chance of cancer, right? If that
Right.
were to get to your insurance company, then does that
Right.
mean you're going to be perhaps not
Declined or
covered by
right.
insurance, right?
Right.
So there's a lot of concerns, and these concerns have been out there since when we first started doing some of the human genome.
Sure.
People were concerned, well, who's going to have access and what are they going to do
Right.
with it? How is it going to be used? And is it going to count against me if the insurance company gets some kind of report or some kind of indication that I have a tendency or a possibility of developing something?
Right.
So there's always those concerns. The AI is, it's rapidly evolving, and
It
utility of
doesn't
it.
seem like you guys are using it in that context, though. You guys are
No, no,
really
no.
using it to amplify things that human detection can't find, which
Can't
is
really see, right?
right.
Putting
I mean,
together,
that's
putting together. So
that's the
I
benefit
worked
of it.
for a number of years. I worked for a company that was a spin out of Stanford, and we were very heavily
Mm.
using AI to look at a very large grouping of proteins. We looked at almost 12,000 proteins and all of those interconnections that the proteins have with each other. That's not something that a person can really digest very well, right? I mean,
Right.
how does this one react with this one? And what are the consequences of this versus that? So then you have to use software to put those connections together and to understand the pathways that are interconnected. And that's how we started using it. And this was a number of years ago. But now, as that's gotten better, as the software and the algorithms have gotten better, and the ability to tease out information from everywhere, right? You probably saw that, not a couple of weeks ago, there was this announcement that this AI was going to be used for cancer detection, right? That
Right.
at some point in the future here, we'd be able to take a small little drop of blood and we'd know exactly what the cancer was and how to treat it and where it came from. Eventually, we probably will get there, but it's all somewhat dependent on how good is the software and how good is the training that we,
Right.
as
How
the
we're
users of the
feeding the
software,
machine in. It's just like accounting. It's like garbage in, garbage out.
puts out. Right.
It's got to be accurate and clean data.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's going to be a major part of diagnostics in the future
Oh, yeah. I
and
would think so
helping us
too.
understand patterns that we don't see or recognize readily. Biology is very complex.
Mm-hmm.
And, you're looking at hundreds of thousands of proteins and how they interact with each other. And there are very few people on the planet who understand how every one of those proteins interacts with the other protein.
No,
Right.
but like through machine learning, we can get insight and tie some loose ends and then at least show the humans where to go further, like go down this rabbit hole versus that one, right?
Right.
Maybe it can help guide us.
True.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. So I've got to ask, so when you were a kid, like there's no way you were like, this is what I'm gonna do when I get older. I mean, I'm sure there was medicine maybe or research or like what did you want to do? Obviously, you have a PhD, you have other certifications, patents, all this stuff. You've been doing this a long time. Excellent at it. But like when you were first starting out, because I'm always curious, like people, like I think you and I spoke in our prep call. I was like, I was talking to somebody who's the head of a biopharma company and they had a philosophy degree. But that doesn't mean I can tell my son or my daughter, go get a philosophy degree because you could run a biopharma company. No, there
Yeah.
was a long trajectory there, right? So
Right.
I'm just curious about what, when did
I
you
started,
identify like
I
that this is
started,
the field?
yeah, I started off wanting as a child, actually, as maybe 10 or 11 years old, wanting to be a heart surgeon.
Okay,
That was my
there you
goal.
go.
Right.
Right.
Now, I couldn't tell you where the idea came from because there's
So it
nobody in
wasn't
my family.
from like a family event or
No,
anything.
there's
Okay.
nobody in my family that's in
Wow.
medicine prior to me, but that's what I wanted.
Wow.
And I've told this story before where I was, and I don't know how I managed to accomplish it or my parents accomplished it, but as a 10 or 11-year-old, I had a subscription to the New England Journal of Medicine. I don't know how I got it, but I got it.
Of course,
And
just like every 10 or 11-year-old.
yeah,
Like
just
you
right.
didn't want to be Batman. You wanted to do
I wanted to
that.
be a heart surgeon, right? And
That's
which was, I think,
phenomenal.
such a curious and maybe
Yeah.
even baffling sort of thing for my parents to go, well, where did this even come from? How
Yeah.
did you even come about this? And I spent a good bit of time on that trajectory, trying to get to med
Yeah.
school and trying to do that. And I had an advisor when I was doing my master's who basically counseled me and said, you know, you ask a lot of questions. And as a physician, you don't have the wherewithal to ask a lot of questions in the way that
Right.
medicine
You
is
have to
practiced now.
correct. You have to practice. You have to execute. Right.
Right.
You have to.
It's like
Yeah. You have
you
to
have a couple
execute.
minutes to get some basic information from your patient and try to put yourself in the direction of what they need. You don't have time to ask questions, right? And that was the same difficulty that I had in taking some of these med school classes. You know, the professors in med school just want you to remember something and spit it back out on the test.
Right.
They're not concerned whether you understand it. I
Right.
wanted to understand it. I wanted to know, well,
Right.
why does that happen? What's the mechanism?
Right.
What's the process underlying
Is
this?
this the best way of doing it? And if
Yeah,
not, how do we change the trajectory of it? Right.
right.
Like that's the challenge.
So on the basis of some of that advice and thinking through some of that, I transitioned into into the master's and PhD area on the research side, and then got interested in cardio. I still am very interested in cardiovascular medicine, but I'm interested in infectious disease. You know,
Sure.
there's a whole scope of things that I have an interest in, and this gives me the ability to pivot back and forth between
Right. All
immunology
the
and brain
disciplines.
science and
Yeah.
heart disease and all these different things that I've done in the past. So, you know, if you look at the range of publications that I have, they're all over the place.
Right.
There are molecular aspects of sleep, there's cardiovascular medicine, there's diabetes, there's cancer, there's all kinds of things. So it's allowed me to be very free with the interest that I have and apply what I learned in graduate school against all of these different problems. And
That's
then
phenomenal.
how do we develop a solution? So as a physician, I wouldn't have had that kind of flexibility.
No, no, you're right. You would have had to address the individual patient in front of you
Right.
and
Right.
execute on it, right?
Though in
As
though
opposed to
in some ways, you know, if you were a physician, you could probably count how many patients you had a positive life and death impact on, right? How many patients did
right.
you save in the ER? How many
It's a good
patients did you
point.
save in the OR, right?
Yeah,
One perspective that I've come to at this is if I do a good job at this, I have the potential for impacting millions of people
absolutely. Yeah,
by developing assays and by working on certain questions and problems.
that's exactly right.
So maybe the touch point there is it's broader. I don't
Right.
have a knowledge of that individual patient necessarily, but it's touching more patients
Yeah,
globally than I would have as a physician.
right.
I still wonder if I'm young enough to go back to med school and maybe get that
And
degree
go go after it. Yeah.
just to
Well,
have the patient contact. I mean, I've worked
right.
in cardiovascular medicine, I've worked in oncology, I've worked in
Hmm.
endoscopy, I've worked in pathology. You know, I've had the I don't know if you want to call it gift or whatever, but of having been exposed to a lot of different areas of medicine.
That's phenomenal. Well, thank you all. Thank you for what you guys are doing. I think what you guys are doing are phenomenal. Like you're at the cutting edge of technology and science, and you're going to be part of some major transformations that are going to be happening that will affect millions of lives, including mine, my family's, everything else. So
Yeah, I
it's
hope
very
so. I mean,
important
one of the
work.
goals is to give
Yeah.
people access,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, I mean that is really the challenge. And part of the, you people might think it's dumb, but part of the challenge to get people to go to the doctor is they hate needles. They hate those little things. So if there are ways to make it to lower the barrier to entry and make
Mhm.
people want to go and, do more preventative medicine up front, that can really change the trajectory of public
Yeah,
health.
and I think there's a certain bit of convenience I think that would help people, right? They don't want to spend 2 hours to go sit in an office to get 7 minutes of discussion with their doctor,
No,
right?
I mean, I'm just saying if typical medical practice was in the not the third party payer industry, but actual like we were actually paying direct and it
Hmm.
was all driven that way, like a lot of them would be out of business because for a
Yeah,
15-minute meeting for us to wait 3 hours out of our day. Like, it's ridiculous, but
Yeah.
that's the system. And so we operate within that system.
And the new system, and I don't know how familiar you are with this, with concierge and functional medicine,
Oh, yeah.
is that, and I have a functional physician, and
Mm-hmm.
I've used them in the past. And what I like about that is you're paying for that service,
Yep.
but you have, because you're paying for that service out of pocket,
Right.
you have the ability to sit with that doctor and explain everything that's going on with you.
Right.
And they have the time to evaluate what you're telling them and to think about what's the path forward. How do I make you better? How do I alleviate
Right.
whatever the issue is? And, a lot of those doctors, they only have a couple hundred patients,
Right.
which allows them to spend half a day with their patient if the patient so desires, right?
Right.
And it's no more expensive to do that than it is to pay the insurance premiums. In fact, it's
Right.
oftentimes cheaper
Mm-hmm.
to just pay it out of pocket and put all that insurance money that you would have paid to the premium into something that's a high deductible catastrophic plan as
Yep.
opposed to a preventative plan, right?
Yep.
Because traditional medicine is not engaged in prevention,
Right.
and functional medicine has more of an
or wellness. We had somebody on the podcast earlier that really was in the sick care aspect of medicine. That's what they called it. And then they
Right.
transferred over into wellness, like really just preventative lifestyle, nutrition, all of that, and how that can really change things as well.
Yeah, dramatically. And
Yeah.
that's not how the US system has been built for years and years.
No, not
But
at all.
it's been a push for a long time. I mean, I've worked with prevention specialists for 20 some odd years, and they're always kind of pounding their heads against against the convention to say, look, we need to be taking care of people and not allowing them to get diabetes, not
Right.
getting to the point where they have heart disease or they have liver disease. A little bit of prevention goes a long way.
Absolutely.
And if you teach people and if you get them to be engaged with their own health care, then they're open to the idea of exercising and eating a little bit better. And
Yeah.
because they can see that
They understand the input, the output that they get, the context, the
Mhm.
fact that a little bit of effort will actually make a big difference.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Well, hey, great discussion. Thank you so much. I really learned a lot.
Thank you. I
No,
appreciate the invite.
it was a fantastic conversation. So thank you so much. And we will have information on your companies and invite everybody to connect with you and to follow your work. And we wish you all the best, man. This is just
Thank you very much.
phenomenal what you're
Appreciate
doing.
it. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.